Travis and Dennis laughed when they banned me from the wedding. They said it was only for the closest family. I stood outside the $1.2 million vineyard estate. They were hosting it in the exact estate I bought for Dennis. So, while the string quartet played, I sold it. What the bride discovered made the entire reception fall dead silent. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I would love to know where you are watching from. My name is Olivia. I finally woke up. Chong mo tren hai, moi be mutstiu motsram jamviet chin, moi chin tu. I did not cry when Travis hung up the phone. No, I did not scream, and I did not throw my phone against the wall. I just smiled. It was a small, quiet smile that barely reached my eyes. The apartment was completely silent. It was exactly 8:30 in the evening. Through the tall glass windows of my living room, I could see the city lights blurring into a golden haze. For the past 17 years, I had chased the phantom of a family that never truly existed. Like, I had poured my energy, my patience, and my bank account into a bottomless pit, hoping that one day they would look at me and see a daughter, a sister, someone worth keeping. That phone call was the final click of a lock. The last fragment of my desperate loyalty evaporated into the cold air. I walked into my home office and sat down at my mahogany desk. The surface was perfectly organized, much like the life I had built for myself. I am a wealth manager. I spend my days analyzing risk, mitigating losses, and protecting assets for high net worth individuals. I make logical decisions based on data, not emotions, yet my biggest financial liability had always been my own flesh and blood. I opened my laptop. The screen illuminated the dark room. I navigated to the secure portal of my holding company and opened the balance sheet for the Sonoma County estate, $1.2 million. That was the purchase price 2 years ago. It sat there on the digital ledger, a massive block of capital tied up in sprawling vines and elegant architecture. Dennis had been living in it, pretending he owned the soil he walked on. He hosted lavish parties, posted photos of wine tastings, and built a carefully curated illusion for anyone who would pay attention. And Travis enabled every single lie. They thought I would just sit back and take the humiliation. They assumed my silence meant weakness. They mistook my boundaries for submission, but they forgot one crucial detail. I am exceptionally good at my job. I manage wealth, but I also know how to dismantle it. I stared at the property deed saved in my encrypted folder. The name on the document was mine, only mine. There was no shared trust, no joint tenancy, no legal loophole that gave Dennis a single square inch of that property. He was a guest. A very ungrateful, entitled guest who had just uninvited the owner from her own estate. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The hurt sister inside me was finally quiet when in her place sat the wealth manager, evaluating a bad investment that needed to be liquidated immediately. The numbers did not lie, and the legal framework was ironclad. I did not need to argue with Travis. I did not need to beg Dennis for an invitation. I stood up and walked into the kitchen to pour myself a glass of water. The cold liquid grounded me. For the first time in my adult life, my chest did not ache with the burden of trying to be enough for them. I did not feel the familiar sting of rejection. I only felt absolute clarity. The paperwork would be drafted tomorrow. I was completely done. Chong hai tren hai moi by moiktio namtram. Nam moi ja viet namtram by moi bontiu. The next morning, the California sun was bright and unforgiving. I was 31 years old, and my life was a testament to quiet resilience. I wore a tailored navy suit, carried a leather briefcase, and handled portfolios worth tens of millions, but nobody at my firm knew the messy truth about my origin. I preferred it that way. I met Nora at a small and independent coffee shop near the financial district. Nora had been my best friend since middle school. She was the only person who knew the entire history of Travis and Dennis. She knew the scars they had left, and she knew the silence I used to cover them up. When I arrived, Nora was already sitting at a corner table, staring at her phone with an expression of pure disgust. She pushed the screen toward me before I even had a chance to sit down. "Look at this," she muttered. I glanced at the phone. It was Dennis's social media profile. He had posted a highly edited video of himself walking through the lush vineyards of the Sonoma estate. He was wearing a bespoke linen shirt, holding a glass of red wine, and smiling at the camera with the confidence of a self-made billionaire. The caption read, "Hard work pays off on welcoming the weekend at my personal sanctuary." I stared at the words, hard work, personal sanctuary. He had never worked a full week in his life. Every startup he launched had crashed and burned within 6 months, always bailed out by Travis. Yet here he was, selling a masterclass in deception to his thousands of followers. Nora took a sip of her espresso. He is playing a dangerous game. Olivia, he is telling everyone he owns the place. He is using it to network with venture capitalists and investors. And worse, he is using it to impress Victoria and her family. Victoria was his fiancée. She came from a lineage of old money. Her family name was etched into hospital wings and charity foundations. She was sheltered, naive, and completely captivated by the charismatic, successful entrepreneur Denis pretended to be. He had built an entire relationship on the foundation of my bank account. I handed the phone back to Nora. "Let him play his game," I said softly. My voice was steady. "It does not change the fact that his name is nowhere on the deed." Nora leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "But Olivia, he is literally using your property to con a wealthy heiress into marrying him. He is spinning a web of lies, and Travis is backing him up." "I know," I replied. I ordered a black coffee and watched the barista steam the milk. My mind was already calculating the variables. Dennis was not just a narcissist showing off on the internet, in that he was actively committing financial and emotional fraud. He was presenting assets he did not possess to secure social and financial leverage. In my world, that was a catastrophic risk. I took a slow sip of my coffee, and the bitter taste matched the reality of the situation, and Dennis had woven a beautiful tapestry of deceit. But it was anchored to a house of cards, and I held the only gust of wind that mattered. He was about to learn a very hard lesson about ownership. Illusions require heavy funding. Chuang ba tren hai moi bai muchtio namtram nam moi janviet. Namtram sao moi bai tu. I returned to my office and closed the heavy oak door. The city hummed below me, a symphony of commerce and ambition. I sat at my desk and pulled up the financial records for the Sonoma property. As a wealth manager, I conduct quarterly audits on all my personal assets. It is a standard procedure, a habit ingrained in me from years of protecting client portfolios. I opened the credit monitoring dashboard linked to the estate's address. The screen loaded, displaying a clean history of property tax payments and insurance premiums, but as I scrolled down to the recent inquiries section, a cluster of red flags caught my attention. I leaned closer to the monitor. In the past 60 days, there had been 4 separate hard inquiries from private lending institutions and high-risk venture capital firms. These were not standard mortgage checks. These were aggressive credit pulls associated with massive commercial loans. I clicked on the details of the most recent inquiry. The applicant name listed was Dennis. My pulse remained remarkably steady, but my mind shifted into high gear. Dennis was trying to use the Sonoma estate as collateral for a private business loan. He was attempting to leverage a $1.2 million property he did not own to secure hundreds of thousands of dollars in high-interest debt. He was likely using fraudulent lease agreements or manipulated tax documents to present himself as the primary stakeholder to these unregulated lenders. This was no longer just a family dispute about a wedding invitation, and this was systemic financial fraud. I printed the inquiry reports. The pages slid out of the machine with a crisp, rhythmic sound. I read through the names of the lending firms. They were secondary-tier institutions, the kind that did not require rigorous corporate audits, if the physical collateral looked promising enough. Dennis was desperate for cash. His lifestyle, the bespoke shirts, the lavish parties, the illusion of wealth to impress Victoria. It was all bleeding him dry. Travis must have finally run out of liquid assets to bail him out. So Dennis decided to mortgage the only valuable thing he had access to. My property. I set the papers down and aligned them perfectly with the edge of my desk. The sheer audacity of his plan was staggering. He had banned me from his wedding to ensure I would not mingle with Victoria's family and accidentally reveal the truth. He needed me completely isolated, entirely erased from the narrative, so his fraudulent loan applications could proceed without interference. He thought I was just a quiet, obedient sister who would stay in the shadows and pay the property taxes. He grossly underestimated my professional capabilities. I picked up a red pen and circled the dates of the inquiry. The most recent one was just 4 days ago. He was rushing to secure the capital before the wedding. He needed the funds to maintain the charade after the honeymoon. The pieces of the puzzle locked together with terrifying precision. Dennis was standing on a trapdoor of his own making, and the hinges were already groaning under the weight of his lies. The trap was officially set. Chungbon tren, hemoy be muchtio nam tram nam moy jan viet nam tram ba moy sautung. To understand the magnitude of this betrayal, you have to understand where it started. It started 16 years ago, on a Tuesday in November. I was 15 years old. The sky was the color of bruised iron, and the rain fell in a slow, relentless drizzle, and we were standing in a damp cemetery. The smell of wet earth and decaying lilies filled the air. I stood 3 feet away from my mother's casket, shivering in a black dress that was 2 sizes too big. Eleanor, my mother, was gone. She had been the only buffer between me and the harsh reality of Travis and Dennis. While she was alive, she enforced fairness. But the moment the earth settled over her grave, that fairness was buried with her. I remember looking at Travis. He did not shed a tear, and he stood tall, his jaw set, holding an umbrella over Dennis, who was 17 at the time. I stood in the rain, completely ignored. Nobody offered me shelter. I was just the girl on the edge of the photograph, the afterthought. 2 weeks after the funeral, the life insurance check arrived. Eleanor had set up a modest policy, specifically designating half of the funds for my future college education and half for Denny. She wanted to ensure we both had a fair start. I found the financial statement sitting on the kitchen counter one afternoon. I read the numbers, feeling a brief, fragile flicker of hope. Maybe I would not have to struggle as much as I feared. That evening, Travis walked into the house jingling a set of shiny new keys. He led Dennis out to the driveway. Sitting there was a sleek silver sports car. It was practically brand new. Travis clapped Dennis on the shoulder. "Oh, you need to blend in with the right crowd. Son," he said. "You have to look the part to get ahead." I stood on the porch, my hands trembling in the pockets of my cheap cardigan. "Dad," I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, "where did the money for the car come from?" Travis turned to look at me. His eyes were cold, completely devoid of affection. "It came from the insurance payout," he stated flatly. I stared at him, the cold realization washing over me, but half of that was for my college fund. I said, "Mom promised," Travis scoffed, turning back to admire the car. "Your brother has a future to build in high society. You can take out student loans. You are smart enough to figure it out." He dismissed me with a wave of his hand. In that single moment, my value within the family was permanently quantified. My future, my education, my security, it was all completely expendable if it meant funding Dennis's social climb. I walked back into the house. I had exactly $12 in loose change saved in a glass jar. The next day, I walked 2 miles in the freezing rain to a discount store. I bought my own notebooks, my own pens, and a roll of clear tape to fix my broken backpack. I did not ask Travis for another dime. I learned very early that my bloodline was a financial liability. I learned to survive alone. But my mother had known this would happen. She had seen the trajectory of my life with absolute clarity long before her heart finally stopped. It was during her last week in the hospital, and the room smelled of sharp antiseptic and wilted flowers. I was sitting in a vinyl chair in the hallway, supposedly doing my algebra homework, but I was mostly just listening to the rhythmic beep of her heart monitor. Travis was not there. He was at the country club, claiming he needed fresh air to cope with the stress. Dennis was with him. The only visitor that afternoon was Haley. Haley was a senior partner at a corporate law firm in San Francisco. She was also my mother's oldest friend. She walked into the hospital room wearing a sharp gray suit, holding a thick manila envelope. I had always been slightly intimidated by Haley. She commanded a room simply by standing in it. I crept closer to the door, peering through the slight crack. Eleanor looked incredibly frail against the stark white pillows, but her eyes were sharp. They possessed a desperate, urgent intensity. Haley pulled a stack of documents from the envelope. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" "Eleanor," Haley asked softly, "it is a highly aggressive legal structure. Once this is signed, it cannot be undone. Not by Travis, not by anyone." My mother nodded weakly but firmly. "That is exactly why I need it. Haley, Travis will take everything. He will drain every account to fund Dennis's delusions of grandeur. He will leave Olivia with nothing. I need you to protect her." Haley placed a pen in my mother's trembling hand. "I will keep this completely sealed," Haley promised. "It will remain entirely invisible to Travis. He will not even know it exists until the designated trigger event occurs." My mother signed the papers. The scratch of the pen against the thick parchment sounded deafening in the quiet room. She slumped back against the pillows, exhausted but relieved. "Keep this for her, Haley. Keep my little girl safe." I backed away from the door, my heart pounding against my ribs. I did not understand legal terminology at the time. I did not know what an irrevocable trust was, or how a fiduciary shield worked. I only knew that my dying mother had spent her final ounce of energy building a fortress for me, and she had handed the keys to the most formidable lawyer she knew. Haley walked out of the room a few minutes later. She saw me sitting in the hallway, clutching my math book. She did not smile with pity. She simply placed a firm hand on my shoulder, gave it a reassuring squeeze, and walked away. Her high heels clicked against the linoleum floor with a steady, commanding rhythm. That manila envelope disappeared into the secure vaults of Haley's law firm. It slept there in the dark for 15 years. I grew up believing I was entirely alone, fighting a solitary battle against a father and a brother who viewed me as nothing more than a financial stepping stone. But I was never truly alone. Eleanor had planted a seed in the darkest soil, trusting that it would bloom when the winter was finally over. The weapon was already forged. Chong sao tren hai moi by much theo nam tram, nam moi jan viet nam tram, sao moi bonto. The years following my mother's death were defined by a relentless and a silent grind. While Dennis lived in a vibrant world of financed luxury, I existed in a gray landscape of pure necessity. I took a job at a 24-hour diner the week I turned 16. I worked the closing shifts, serving lukewarm coffee and wiping down sticky tables until 2 in the morning. The smell of old grease and industrial bleach clung to my clothes. I used my tips to buy groceries, textbooks, and eventually a cheap used car to get me to college. Denius, meanwhile, was busy becoming a serial entrepreneur. He launched a high-end concierge app, a boutique marketing agency, and a luxury lifestyle brand. Each venture was built on aggressive marketing and zero substance. Each one collapsed spectacularly within a year, and every single time, Travis was there to absorb the impact. Travis liquidated his stock portfolios, refinanced the family home, and drained his retirement accounts to pay off Dennis's creditors and keep his golden boy out of bankruptcy court. Dennis never had to face the consequences of his failures. He just moved on to the next shiny idea. Wearing bespoke suits paid for by his father's dwindling savings, I watched this from a distance. I graduated from the university with a degree in finance, entirely debt-free because I had worked 3 jobs simultaneously. I secured an entry-level position at a premier wealth management firm. I was the first one in the office every morning and the last one to leave at night. I learned how to read markets, structure assets, and identify systemic vulnerabilities. I began building a portfolio of high net worth clients who trusted my cold, methodical approach to money. My income grew exponentially. I moved into a luxury apartment overlooking the city. I bought tailored suits that mirrored the armor Haley wore. I was building a solid, undeniable empire out of the spare change Travis had refused to give me. But despite my professional success, a deep, hollow ache remained in my chest. I was 30 years old, financially independent, and deeply respected in my field, yet whenever my phone rang and Travis's name flashed on the screen, I felt like that 15-year-old girl standing in the rain. They only called when they needed a bridge over a financial gap. They never called to ask about my day, my career, or my well-being. It was always a transactional exchange disguised as family duty. I knew exactly what they were doing. I could analyze a toxic corporate merger in 10 minutes, but I was completely blind to the toxic merger of my own family. I kept answering their calls. I kept analyzing their bad investments. I kept hoping that if I provided enough value, the equation would finally balance. I believed that if I proved myself to be the most capable and reliable person in their lives, they would finally invite me to sit at the table. I was building a fortress, but I kept leaving the front door wide open. Chong be tren he moi be mustio nam tram nam moi jam Vietnam tram he moi batu. The catalyst for the ultimate betrayal happened exactly 2 years ago. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was in the middle of reviewing a quarterly earnings report when Travis called. His voice lacked its usual arrogant boom. It sounded thin, strained, and desperate. "Olivia, I need you to come to my office immediately," he said. "It is about your brother." I canceled my afternoon meetings and drove across town. When I walked into Travis's office, Dennis was sitting on the leather sofa, looking uncharacteristically defeated. The truth spilled out in a messy, panicked rush. Dennis had invested heavily in a boutique wine distribution company that had just been exposed as a massive Ponzi scheme. He was facing personal liability. His creditors were preparing to seize his remaining assets, which were practically non-existent, and Travis had nothing left to give. Travis had leveraged everything he owned. They were both staring down the barrel of total financial ruin. "We need your help, Olivia," Travis said, unable to look me in the eye. "Dennis needs a stable asset to shield him, something to prove to the creditors that he has a foundation. There is a vineyard estate in Sonoma. It is a distress sale, going for $1.2 million. If we secure it, Dennis can rebrand his image, launch a legitimate wine label, and satisfy the lenders, but my credit is completely maxed out." I sat in silence for a long time. I looked at the two men who had systematically erased me from their lives. They were asking me to drop over $1 million to clean up a catastrophic mess I had absolutely nothing to do with. Logically, as a wealth manager, the answer was a definitive no. It was a terrible investment with a high-risk operator. But emotionally, I was standing in a dangerous intersection. Travis looked at me with a pleading expression I'd never seen before. Dennis muttered, "Please, Olivia, you are the only family we have left to turn to. Family." That single word bypassed every analytical defense mechanism I possessed. They were finally acknowledging me as a crucial part of the unit. They needed me. So, in a moment of profound weakness, I agreed. I purchased the Sonoma estate in cash. The title deed was registered exclusively under my name, and the funds came directly from my private accounts. A week later, I handed Dennis the heavy brass keys to the property. When he looked ecstatic, already planning the renovations. But before I let go of the keys, I slid a single sheet of paper across the granite kitchen counter. "What is this?" he asked, barely glancing at it. "It is a standard occupancy waiver for the insurance company." I lied smoothly, "Just stating that you are acting as the primary caretaker of the grounds. Sign it, and the keys are yours." Denise grabbed a pen and scribbled his signature at the bottom without reading a single clause. He was too arrogant, too eager to claim his new castle, to realize what he had just executed. It was not an insurance waiver. It was an unconditional short-term residential lease agreement. It explicitly stated he had zero equity, zero ownership rights, and could be evicted with a standard 30-day notice. He had just signed his own future eviction. Chong tam tren hai moi by muchtio nam tram nam moi jamviet, nam tram by moi sozu. People often ask me how a rational, highly educated financial expert could make such a colossal mistake. Why would I hand over a $1.2 million estate to people who had treated me with nothing but cold indifference? It is a valid question, and the answer is rooted in a dark psychological trap. In my industry, we study cognitive bias. We look at how investors double down on bad stocks simply because they have already invested so much capital. It is called the sunk cost fallacy. You keep pouring resources into a losing venture, hoping the market will eventually turn. But what I experienced with Travis and Dennis was far more insidious, and it was the cruel normalization of transactional love. When you are raised in an environment where affection is entirely conditional, your brain rewires its understanding of connection. I had learned early on that my mere existence was not enough to warrant care. I was not the golden child. I was the secondary asset. To gain any emotional currency in that household, I had to be undeniably useful. I developed a toxic form of learned helplessness. I convinced myself that if I could just solve their biggest problem, if I could literally buy their salvation, the dynamic would finally shift. I told myself that the Sonoma estate was not just a real estate transaction, but it was a bridge. I thought I was purchasing respect. I thought I was securing my position in the family portrait. I imagined Thanksgiving dinners in that beautiful dining room. With Travis finally raising a glass to acknowledge my success, I pictured Dennis treating me like an equal partner. This is the danger of hoping for closure from people who are fundamentally incapable of giving it. You construct elaborate fantasies to justify their continued presence in your life. You ignore the blatant red flags because facing the truth means admitting that your lifelong investment of patience and loyalty has yielded absolutely zero returns. The day I handed those keys to Dennis, I drove back to the city feeling a strange, hollow sense of victory. I had saved them. Surely, everything would be different now. I sat in my quiet apartment that night, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the thank you call that never came. The silence was deafening. Looking back, I see the transaction for what it truly was. It was not a bridge. It was a ransom payment. I was trying to buy back the family I had lost when my mother died. But you cannot buy something that does not exist. Travis and Dennis did not see a daughter or a sister executing a massive rescue operation. They simply saw a fully funded ATM that had finally dispensed the requested cash. They saw a resource functioning exactly as designed. The harsh reality settled in my bones long after the ink had dried on the deed. I had traded a significant portion of my net worth for a seat at a table that was never going to be offered to me. I didn't buy a house. I bought an illusion. Chungchin tren he moi by mutstio nam tram nam moi jambiet nam tram ba moi bontu. Dennis wasted absolutely no time establishing his new empire, and within a month, the Sonoma estate was transformed. He hired expensive interior designers to outfit the rooms in modern rustic luxury. He stocked the wine cellar with vintage bottles and parked a leased Range Rover in the circular driveway. He immersed himself in the local high society, joining exclusive wine tasting clubs and networking at charity galas. And he did it all under the guise of the self-made vineyard owner. I watched this transformation from my office in the city, 50 miles away. I did not visit the estate. I was too busy managing aggressive portfolios and navigating volatile markets. But the updates reached me anyway. Denia was a master of curating an image. His social media feeds became a relentless stream of sunset vineyard tours, private chef dinners, and elegant cocktail parties. He referred to the property as his sanctuary and his life's work. The audacity was almost impressive. He was living inside a $1.2 million shell that I owned, yet he paraded around like the architect of his own destiny. And Travis played the role of the proud patriarch perfectly. He attended every event Dennis hosted, holding court in the living room I had paid for, boasting to his friends about his son's remarkable business acumen. I was the silent ghost maintaining the infrastructure. I paid the annual property taxes. I covered the exorbitant premium for the estate insurance. I handled the maintenance invoices for the irrigation systems. I was the unseen foundation holding up their elaborate stage play. I told myself I was being the bigger person. I convinced myself that true power lies in silent control, not loud validation. But the truth was, I was just too tired to fight. Then, Victoria entered the picture. She was the daughter of a prominent real estate developer. She was elegant, sheltered, and entirely swept away by Dennis's curated charm. They met at a charity auction in Napa Valley. Dennis introduced himself as the owner of a boutique vineyard in Sonoma. It was a perfect match. She brought the old money prestige, and he provided the romantic entrepreneurial narrative. As their relationship escalated, my presence in the family narrative was systematically erased. It was not a sudden exclusion. It was a slow, deliberate fade. When Victoria's parents asked about his family, Dennis told them he was an only child. He claimed Travis was a widower who had dedicated his life to raising him. He painted a picture of a tight-knit, exclusive father and son dynamic, and there was absolutely no room in that story for an estranged, independent sister working in corporate finance. I became a secret that needed to be kept. If Victoria or her powerful family discovered that the charismatic vineyard owner was actually living rent-free in his younger sister's property, because he had bankrupted every business he touched, the engagement would instantly evaporate. Dennis knew this, Travis knew this, so they simply deleted me from the script. I was no longer a family member. I was a liability management problem. The ghost was officially banished from the castle. The erasure did not happen overnight. It was executed with a series of surgical, polite excuses. Thanksgiving approached, the first major holiday since Dennis moved into the estate. I called Travis to ask what time I should drive up to Sonoma. His voice was unusually tight. "Oh, Olivia," he said, "Victoria's extended family is flying in. The dining room is completely full. We just do not have the space this year. Maybe next time." Next time. I swallowed the excuse, and I stayed in the city and ordered takeout. Then came Christmas. The vineyard was famously beautiful in the winter. I assumed we would finally gather around the massive stone fireplace I had paid to restore. I called Dennis. He did not answer. Travis texted me instead. "We are heading to the Aspen Ski Lodge with Victoria's parents. The estate is locked up. We will catch up in January." Every single holiday, there was a perfectly reasonable, insurmountable barrier, a tight guest list, a sudden trip, a scheduling conflict. They were gaslighting me with logistics. I found out later from a mutual acquaintance that the estate was never locked up during Christmas. Dennis had hosted a lavish winter gala for 50 local investors and socialites. He had catered the event with private chefs and poured vintage champagne. Travis had stood by the door, greeting guests and playing the proud father of the self-made wine magnate. They had deliberately orchestrated a schedule that ensured I was completely absent from the narrative. They needed the canvas blank so Dennis could paint his masterpiece of deception. If the awkward corporate sister showed up and accidentally mentioned the true ownership of the property, the entire facade would crumble. Like they were protecting their investment, and their investment was the lie. I did not push back. In my line of work, when a client starts avoiding my calls and hiding financial statements, I do not chase them. I simply observe the pattern. The pattern here was undeniable. Travis and Dennis were actively managing my distance, and they were employing a strategy of systematic exclusion. I was the silent partner in a fraudulent enterprise, and they were ensuring I never audited the books. It is a profound realization when you understand that your family does not actually want you. They want the resources you provide, and they want the convenience of your absence. Yeah, I stopped calling. I stopped asking about the holidays. I retreated into my work, closing deals and building portfolios. I let them have the Sonoma estate. I let them have their imaginary high society life. I focused entirely on my own reality, but I kept every single receipt. Chuang moi mot tren he moi be much tio nam tram nam moi jam viet bon tram so moi basu. The ultimate proof of my erasure arrived on a random Tuesday in February. I was having lunch with Nora at our usual spot. We were discussing municipal bonds when she suddenly stopped talking. She was staring at her phone screen, her brow furrowed in disbelief. She slowly turned the device toward me. "You need to see this," she said softly. It was an Instagram post from Victoria's public profile. The photograph was professionally taken, likely by a hired photographer. It featured Dennis, Victoria, Travis, and Victoria's wealthy parents standing in the grand foyer of the Sonoma estate. They were all smiling brightly, holding crystal champagne flutes behind them. The sweeping staircase I had authorized the funds to rebuild looked magnificent. The caption hit me harder than the image itself, celebrating a beautiful weekend with my amazing fiancé and his father. So incredibly proud of the home Denise has built for us. Just a small, perfect family. I stared at the glowing screen for 30 full seconds. The home Denise built. A small, perfect family. There was no mention of a sister, and there was no acknowledgement of the woman whose bank account made the crystal flutes and the sweeping staircase possible. When in their curated digital reality, I simply did not exist. I was not even a footnote. I was entirely redacted. Nora watched my face carefully, and she expected me to cry. She expected me to express outrage or shock. But I felt absolutely nothing. The emotional center of my chest was completely cold. I took out my own phone, navigated to the post, and quietly took a screenshot. I saved the image into a secure digital folder on my cloud drive. I did not have a specific plan for it yet, but my professional instincts told me to document the fraud. Nora reached across the table and touched my hand. "Are you okay?" she asked. Her voice was full of genuine concern. I looked up from my phone. "I am perfectly fine," I said. And it was the absolute truth. I was not heartbroken, and you cannot break a heart that has already detached from the host. Victoria's parents looked genuinely happy in the photo. They were distinguished, respectable people who thought they were marrying their daughter into a solid, successful family. They had no idea they were posing inside a $1.2 million stage set. Dennis was essentially running a long con, and Travis was his willing accomplice. The sheer scale of the manipulation was breathtaking. It was a masterclass in sociopathic charm. I did not hate Victoria. I actually felt a brief flicker of pity for her. She was walking blindfolded into a financial and emotional disaster, but my priority was not saving her. My priority was finally protecting myself. I simply finished my salad, paid the bill, and walked back to my office. The screenshot sat in my folder, a digital anchor of their deception. They had stolen my property to build a fake family, but they forgot that I still held the actual deed. The transaction was finally over. Chung moi hai train hai moi by much tio nam tram nam moi jam Vietnam tram hai moi hai tu. Spring arrived, and with it came the final undeniable severance. Dennis and Victoria had set a date for June. The wedding was going to be the social event of the season, hosted entirely on the manicured grounds of the Sonoma estate. 200 guests were invited. Senators, tech executives, and real estate moguls were on the list. Thick, cream-colored cardstock with gold embossing was mailed out across the state. I did not receive one. I found out about the finalized date through a junior analyst at my firm whose family ran in the same social circles as Victoria's parents. The analyst casually mentioned the upcoming vineyard wedding, completely unaware of my connection to the groom. I smiled politely, excused myself, and walked into my private office. I locked the door. I picked up my phone and dialed Travis. He answered on the third ring. The background noise sounded like a busy golf course. What is it? "Olivia," he asked, his tone clipped and impatient. "I am in the middle of a round." "Did my wedding invitation get lost in the mail?" I asked. My voice was entirely flat. Silence hung on the line for 4 seconds. Then a heavy sigh. "Olivia, let us not do this right now." "Do what?" I asked. "Acknowledge reality." He cleared his throat. "The guest list is incredibly tight." Victoria's family has a massive network. They are paying for the catering. So they dictate the numbers. Dennis just does not have the space to include everyone. I bought the venue, Travis. I stated clearly, I own the space. That is different. He snapped. It is his home now. Do not ruin this for him. He hung up. I immediately dialed Denna. He answered almost instantly. Look, Travis already told me you called, Dennis said, his voice dripping with condescension. And stop making this about you. I am not invited to my own brother's wedding. I said, it is a simple observation, not a drama. Dennis let out a short, arrogant laugh. It was the sound of a man completely intoxicated by his own fake success. Be honest, Olivia. You do not fit in with this crowd. Victoria's family is elite. You are a corporate workaholic who makes everyone uncomfortable with your spreadsheet mentality. You would just stand in the corner and judge everyone. It is better this way. Do not embarrass me. Do not embarrass him. I was the sole reason he had a stage to stand on. He was standing in a house I paid for, wearing a suit bought with the money my mother left me and telling me I was not good enough to witness his fraudulent triumph. The audacity was not just offensive. It was clinically fascinating. He genuinely believed that the Sonoma estate belonged to him because his ego demanded it. He had rewritten reality to serve his narrative, and he expected me to comply with the edit. But reality is not a narrative. Reality is a legal document recorded in the county clerk's office. I set the phone down. The final tie was officially severed. The bloodline was completely dead. Chong moy batren he moy by muxtiu namtram nam moy jam Vietnam tram he moy chin tum. I am a wealth manager. When a system presents an anomaly, I do not just acknowledge it, I dissect it until I find the root cause. The anomaly was the cluster of hard credit inquiries I had discovered on the estate's address back in January. Dennis was trying to secure commercial capital, but something about the timing and the lenders did not make sense. I spent the weekend running a discreet background check. I used public records, corporate filings, and a few contacts in the private equity sector. What I uncovered was not just a brother overspending on a lavish lifestyle. It was a systematic, predatory fraud. Denise was not just lying to Victoria. He was running a parallel scheme. I traced the names associated with the high-risk lenders. They were not corporate banking entity. They were private, wealthy individuals. Specifically, they were women. I found 2 other private companies recently registered under Dennis's name, both claiming the Sonoma estate as their primary business address. Through a series of corporate filings, I identified the co-signers, 2 different heiresses from the tech sector. Dennis was using the majestic backdrop of my $1.2 million vineyard to play the role of the successful, lonely entrepreneur. He was hosting these women at the estate when Victoria was out of town, spinning tales of expanding his wine empire. He was promising them phantom equity in a property he did not own in exchange for massive injections of startup capital. He was a serial romance scammer. He was bleeding these women dry, using their funds to maintain the illusion of wealth for Victoria, while simultaneously trying to secure traditional loans to cover the gaps. The sheer sociopathy of the operation was staggering. Travis had to know. Travis was always the one managing the logistics of Dennis's failures. Travis was helping him juggle the schedules, ensuring the women never crossed paths. They had turned my mother's legacy into a staging ground for a sophisticated financial As a professional, I had seen sophisticated frauds dismantled by federal regulators, but this was deeply personal. He was using the very estate I purchased to save him from ruin to orchestrate an even larger ruin for innocent victims. Victoria was just the main prize, the ultimate exit strategy. The other women were merely bridge loans to keep the lifestyle afloat. If I remained silent, I was complicit, and if I allowed this wedding to proceed, I was essentially endorsing a highly destructive financial crime. I had stayed quiet to keep the peace, but there was no peace left to keep. I printed out the corporate filings, the credit inquiries, and the business registrations. I compiled them into a neat, meticulously organized dossier. Every lie was documented. every fraudulent claim was backed by a solid paper trail. I slid the dossier into a thick manila folder. Silence was no longer an option. Chuang moi bontre he moi by muxtio namtram nam moi javiet bontram chin moi batu. I closed the manila folder and rested my hands flat on the polished mahogany of my desk. The silence in my apartment was profound. A normal person might have picked up the phone, called the police, or screamed at their father. A normal person might have driven to Sonoma and thrown a brick through the magnificent stained glass window of the foyer. But I am not a normal person. I am a fiduciary. I deal in contracts, clauses, and calculated liquidation. I did not want a messy, emotional confrontation. I wanted a clean surgical removal. I picked up my cell phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I had not called in 3 years. Haley, my mother's best friend, the senior partner at the corporate law firm. I pressed dial and held the phone to my ear. If you have ever had a family member take advantage of your silence, you know exactly how cold the room gets when you finally decide you are done. Let me know in the comments if you resonate with that feeling. Haley answered on the second ring. Olivia, she said, her voice warm but instantly sharp, sensing the timing. It is a Sunday night. What is wrong? I need your help. Haley, I said evenly, I need to liquidate an asset and I need to execute a completely airtight eviction. I need it done before the 15th of June. The 15th of June was the date of the wedding. Haley did not ask for the emotional backstory. She did not offer platitudes. She operated on the exact same frequency I did. Come to my office tomorrow morning at 8 sharp, she instructed. Bring every document you have. I will clear my morning schedule. I hung up the phone. I walked into my kitchen, poured a glass of cold water, and drank it slowly. The anxiety that had plagued me for 17 years, the desperate need to be accepted, the fear of upsetting Travis, the endless accommodation of Dennis's ego was entirely gone. It had been replaced by a crystalline sense of purpose. I was going to dismantle the illusion. I was going to take back the soil, the house, and the narrative. They had laughed when they banned me from the wedding. They thought I was securely locked outside the gates of their high society triumph. They did not realize that I owned the gates. I owned the ground the gates were built on, and I was about to revoke their access permanently. The power was not in the money. It was in the truth. Dennis had built an empire of sand, relying on the assumption that I would never turn on the fan. He bet his entire future on my lifelong habit of passive endurance. It was the worst mathematical calculation he had ever made. I went to bed that night and slept a deep, dreamless sleep. The era of the quiet, compliant sister was officially over. The surgical eviction had begun. Haley's office was located on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in the financial district. It was an environment built entirely on precision, confidentiality, and absolute legal authority. The walls were lined with thick legal volumes, and the sprawling mahogany desk was free of any unnecessary clutter. I sat across from her at exactly 8 o'clock on Monday morning. I handed her the manila folder containing the property deed, the short-term lease agreement Dennis had signed 2 years ago, and the detailed records of his fraudulent credit inquiries. Haley put on her reading glasses and opened the file. She did not speak for 15 minutes. The only sound in the room was the crisp turning of pages. When she finally looked up, her expression was a mix of professional satisfaction and cold assessment. "This is a masterclass in self-destruction," she said quietly. "He has built a massive liability structure on a foundation of absolute zero equity. To the average person, Dennis's illusion might seem incredibly solid. He lived in the estate, he hosted the parties, he told the stories, but in the eyes of the law, narratives and Instagram photos hold absolutely no weight." Haley pointed to the title deed. "This single piece of paper is the only truth that matters. The law operates on a binary system of ownership. You either hold the title, or you do not. Dennis does not. He is not a stakeholder. He is not a partner. Legally speaking, he is a temporary guest who has overstayed his welcome." She then picked up the lease agreement, the one he had signed without reading. assuming it was just a bureaucratic formality for the insurance company. By signing this, Haley explained, he explicitly acknowledged your sole ownership and his status as a tenant. He waived any right to claim adverse possession or equitable interest. He essentially handed you a loaded weapon and told you to hold it. We spent the next hour mapping out the process. I did not want a messy, protracted legal battle. I wanted a clean, definitive strike. People often misunderstand how justice works in the corporate world. They think it requires a loud courtroom, aggressive cross-examinations, and dramatic reveal. But true, terrifying justice is usually administered silently, through a certified letter and a properly filed form. A well-documented audit trail will crush a charismatic lie every single time. Denis was trying to secure commercial loans by presenting himself as the property owner, a blatant act of financial misrepresentation. If those lenders conducted a rigorous title search, they would find my name. If they demanded a signature, he would have to forge it. He was operating on a timeline of pure desperation. We will execute the sale immediately, Haley stated. Once the property is legally transferred to a new entity, his lease is voided under the new ownership terms. We issue a standard 30-day notice to vacate. It is entirely legal, completely standard, and absolutely devastating. I nodded. There was no anger in my response. I was just reviewing the mechanics of a necessary liquidation. The paperwork would be flawless. Justice was just a matter of documentation. Chong moi sautren he, moi bai mukteo nam tram nam moi jamviet nam tram bon moi lam tu. Before we finalized the eviction strategy, Haley stood up from her desk. She walked over to a heavy steel safe integrated into the oak paneling of her office wall. She entered a complex digital combination, and the heavy door clicked open. I watched her in silence, which she reached inside and pulled out a faded manila envelope. It looked exactly like the one I had seen her holding in my mother's hospital room 15 years ago. The edges were slightly worn, but the red wax seal on the back remained unbroken. Haley walked back to the desk and placed the envelope gently in front of me. I made a promise to Eleanor a long time ago, Haley said softly. Her voice lost its sharp corporate edge for a brief moment, and she told me to keep this sealed until the exact moment you needed absolute protection from Travis. I believe that moment has arrived. I stared at the envelope. My hands felt strangely heavy as I broke the seal and pulled out the thick stack of legal documents. The header of the first page read, Irrevocable Trust Agreement. I read through the clauses, my wealth manager training automatically processing the complex legal jargon. Before she died, my mother had quietly transferred a small, hidden portfolio of assets into this trust, but she did not just leave me money. She left me a legal fortress. The trust was structured with a specific fiduciary shield. It explicitly stated that any funds disbursed to me could never be claimed, managed, or contested by Travis or any of his dependents. It was a complete legal firewall. The initial seed money I used to start my first investment portfolio, the money that eventually grew into my wealth management firm and allowed me to purchase the Sonoma estate. It all traced back to this protected core. I looked up at Haley, my vision blurring slightly for the first time in years. Travis cannot touch the proceeds of the estate sale, I whispered. He cannot claim it was family money. Exactly, Haley confirmed. An irrevocable trust removes the assets from the grantor's taxable estate and places them entirely out of the reach of creditors or disgruntled family members. Travis has absolutely zero legal standing to sue you for the funds or the property. Eleanor knew he would try to drain you to support Dennis. She built a wall that he cannot climb. I sat back in the leather chair. The realization washed over me like a cold, clarifying wave. I had spent 17 years believing I was an orphan in a household of predators. I thought my mother had simply left me behind, but she had seen the trajectory of my life. She had anticipated their greed, even from the grave. She'd been standing between me and their manipulation. She did not leave me defenseless. She left me a sophisticated financial weapon, and she entrusted it to the one person who would ensure it was deployed correctly. Travis and Dennis thought they were playing a brilliant game of chess against a naive, desperate sister. They did not realize they were actually playing against Eleanor. The checkmate was already engineered. Chong moibe tren he moibe mushtio namtram nam moi jam viet namtram bo moi tam tu. The next 4 days were a masterclass in bureaucratic efficiency. I did not engage in any emotional preparations. I did not write an angry letter to Dennis or a tearful email to Travis. I simply executed a series of financial transactions. First, I registered a new limited liability company in the state of Delaware. The LLC was completely anonymous on the surface, but I was the sole managing member. I named it the November Group, a quiet homage to the month my mother passed away. Have you ever set a boundary so firm that it felt like signing a peace treaty with yourself? Keep watching, because the peace I was about to secure required absolute ruthlessness. Once the LLC was legally established, I initiated the sale of the Sonoma estate. I sold the property from myself as an individual to the November Group. I processed the transaction at fair market value, transferring the funds between my own accounts to ensure the financial records were impeccable. The county clerk recorded the transfer, and the new title deed was issued, and I was no longer the individual owner of the vineyard. The November Group was the landlord now, and the November Group had absolutely zero interest in maintaining a non-paying one fraudulent tenant. I sat in Haley's office on Thursday afternoon to review the final documents, and she handed me a crisp white sheet of paper bearing the imposing letterhead of her firm. It was a formal notice to vacate. It stated that due to a change in property ownership, the current tenancy agreement was terminated. The occupant, Dennis, had exactly 30 days to remove all personal belongings and vacate the premises. Failure to comply would result in immediate legal action and the involvement of county sheriffs. It was cold, clinical, and completely devoid of emotion. There were no exclamation points, and there were no accusations of fraud or betrayal. It was simply the mechanical application of property law. "Are you certain you want to deliver this electronically during the event?" Haley asked, her pen hovering over the final sign-off. "Yes," I replied smoothly. "A physical courier might be turned away at the gate by security." An email sent directly to his personal device, copying the relevant stakeholders, ensures immediate, undeniable receipt. Plus, it establishes a digital timestamp for the legal notice. Haley nodded, a faint smile playing on her lips. She signed the document and handed it to me, and the trap was fully constructed. The walls were sealed and the exit doors were locked. I placed the documents in my briefcase and walked out into the busy San Francisco streets. I had purchased that estate hoping to buy a fraction of their love. I was now using it to completely sever the infection they had brought into my life. I went back to my apartment, packed a small overnight bag, and prepared for the drive north. I was not attending a wedding. I was attending a liquidation. The paperwork was signed and sealed. Chong moi tam tren, he moi bay muchtio, nam tram nam moi jan viet nam tram moi ba tu. Saturday, June 15th, the sky over Sonoma County was a brilliant cloudless blue. The temperature held steady at a perfect 82 degrees. It was the kind of weather wedding planners charge a premium to guarantee. I drove my dark sedan up the winding country roads, navigating the familiar route toward the estate. I did not drive up to the main gate. Instead, I parked on a public utility access road about 200 yards away, partially concealed by a grove of old oak trees. I turned off the engine and rolled down the window, and through the warm summer air, I could hear the faint, elegant notes of a live-string quartet playing on the massive stone patio. I pulled out a pair of high-powered binoculars from the glove compartment and adjusted the focus. The estate looked magnificent, and Dennis had spared absolutely no expense, or rather, he had spared no expense of the funds he was desperately trying to secure through his fraudulent loans. There were enormous floral arrangements cascading over the entryways. Valet attendants were busy parking an endless stream of luxury vehicles, black Mercedes, sleek Porsches, and a few vintage Rolls-Royces. The elite society of California had gathered to witness the union of two prominent families. Except only one family was truly prominent. The other was a hollow shell built on my hijacked credit. I could see the guests mingling on the manicured lawns, holding flutes of expensive champagne. I spotted Travis near the main entrance. He was wearing a custom tuxedo, holding a cigar, and laughing expansively with a group of older men who looked like venture capitalists. He was completely in his element, radiating the false confidence of a successful patriarch. He was playing the role he loved most, the wealthy father of a brilliant entrepreneur. I lowered the binoculars and looked at the digital clock on my dashboard. It was 8:15 in the evening. According to the meticulously detailed itinerary Nora had managed to acquire from a mutual friend, the reception was shifting into the formal toast phase. The guests would be seated in the grand dining hall I had paid to renovate. They would be pouring the vintage wine stored in the cellar I owned. The contrast between my reality and their illusion was stark. I sat alone in a parked car on a dusty side road, wearing a simple cashmere sweater, holding the absolute legal power to destroy everything happening inside those gates. They were surrounded by 200 wealthy witnesses, basking in adulation and luxury. Completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet had already been sold, I did not feel a rush of adrenaline. I did not feel the fiery heat of vengeance. I only felt the cold, methodical calm of a professional executing a long overdue correction. I opened my laptop and connected to the secure mobile hotspot. I pulled up the drafted email. The attachments were already loaded. The PDF of the new title deed, the sale contract, the 30-day notice to vacate, the audit summary of his recent credit inquiries. The stage was perfectly set. Chung moi chin tren, hai moi be much tio nam tram nam moi janvier, nam tram hai moi chin tu. I watched the clock on my laptop screen. The digital numbers shifted with silent precision. 8:45, 8:46. Nora's text message chimed on my phone. He is walking up to the microphone now. The father of the bride just finished. Dennis is about to give his toast. I could picture the scene perfectly, the clinking of glasses fading away, the warm glow of the chandeliers reflecting off the crystal, Dennis standing at the head table, wearing his charismatic, humble smile. He would speak about his hard work. He would talk about the beautiful sanctuary he had built for his new bride. He would thank his devoted father for guiding him through the tough world of business, and he would sell the illusion one final time to the 200 people sitting in my house. At exactly 8:47, I moved my cursor over the send button. The email was addressed to Dennis's primary personal account. I placed Travis's private email in the carbon copy field. I also included Victoria's personal address, which I had sourced through public corporate directories. But the most important addition was the fourth email address. It belonged to Victoria's father, the real estate magnate who had likely paid for the extravagant catering. The subject line was neutral and professional notification of property ownership transfer and legal notice to vacate. The body of the email was precisely 6 lines long. It contained no exclamation marks. It held no emotional grievances. It simply stated the facts. The property located at the Sonoma address had been sold to the November Group LLC. The transaction was finalized and legally recorded, and the current occupant had 30 days to vacate the premises entirely. Enclosed were the legal proofs of ownership, the eviction notice, and a highly detailed summary of the unauthorized commercial credit inquiries attempted under the property's address. I ended the email with a single sentence. I wish you a legally compliant and transparent marriage. Olivia. I did not hesitate. I did not second-guess the impact. I pressed send. The progress bar flashed green for a fraction of a second before disappearing. The payload was delivered. It traveled through the cellular networks, invisible and silent, bypassing the security guards, the floral arrangements, and the string quartet. It landed simultaneously in 4 different inboxes inside that dining hall. I closed the laptop. I did not wait around to watch the physical fallout through the binoculars. The legal mechanism was in motion, and the results were inevitable. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine purred to life. I put the car in drive and slowly rolled down the utility road, merging back onto the main highway. I drove back toward the city, listening to a classical piano concerto on the radio for the first time in 17 years. The heavy, suffocating weight of my family's expectations was completely gone. I had not just evicted them from a property, I had evicted them from my life. The bomb had successfully detonated. The detailed real-time updates arrived in a steady stream of text messages from Nora. I sat on my velvet sofa, holding a cup of chamomile tea, watching the screen of my phone illuminate the darkened living room. The contrast between my absolute serenity and the absolute chaos unfolding 50 miles away was profound. Nora texted, "He just stopped mid-sentence. He is staring at his phone. He looks like he's going to be sick." I took a slow sip of my tea. The email had landed. Mandinis was currently digesting the reality of his own eviction while standing in front of 200 elite guests. According to Nora, the silence in the grand dining hall became thick and uncomfortable. Travis walked up to the podium, placing a hand on Dennis's shoulder, asking him if he was all right. Dennis simply handed the phone to his father. Travis read the screen, and the color completely drained from his face. Then the situation escalated beyond their control. Victoria, sensing the sudden panic, stepped forward in her designer gown. Her mother, Beatrice, a woman known for her ruthless corporate instincts, followed closely behind. Beatrice did not ask for permission. She simply reached out and took the phone from Travis's trembling hand. Nora texted again. Beatrice is reading the email out loud to Victoria. "Oh my God. Olivia." She just opened the attachments. Beatrice's sharp eyes scanned the formal notice to vacate, the sale contract, and the property deed bearing my name. The illusion of the self-made billionaire evaporated in less than 60 seconds, but the fatal blow was the fourth attachment. The detailed summary of his fraudulent commercial credit inquiries. Beatrice was a seasoned executive. She recognized financial fraud the moment she saw the documentation. She turned to Dennis and demanded an explanation. Dennis stammered. He tried to claim it was a misunderstanding, a minor family dispute over an inheritance. He tried to deploy his usual charm. But his charm was entirely powerless against a certified legal audit. Then, the secondary twist occurred. It was an anomaly I had not planned, but one that perfectly illustrated the danger of his reckless deceit. A woman sitting at table 4, the mother of a tech heiress, stood up. She had been listening to the escalating argument. When she recognized Dennis, she pointed a manicured finger at him and loudly announced to the room that this was the same man who had convinced her daughter to invest $300,000 into a phantom wine distribution company just last month. The dining hall erupted, and the carefully curated high society wedding collapsed into a chaotic scene of accusations and panic, and Beatrice grabbed Victoria's arm and immediately escorted her out of the estate. The other guests began calling their drivers. Dennis was left standing alone at the head table, surrounded by melting ice sculptures and untouched champagne. He had spent his entire life manipulating narratives. But he could not manipulate a PDF file. The truth was not just revealed. It was formally documented, legally binding, and publicly witnessed. I set my phone down on the glass coffee table. The illusion was completely shattered. Chung hai moi mo tren hai moi be mux tionam tramnam moi jan Vietnam tramnam moi sautu. Sunday morning broke with a quiet golden light pouring into my apartment. I woke up feeling remarkably rested. I made a pot of French press coffee and sat at my kitchen island, reviewing global market trends on my tablet. At exactly 9:15, my phone vibrated against the marble countertop, and the caller identification displayed Dennis's name. I let it ring 3 times before I calmly swiped the screen to answer. I did not say hello. I simply waited. "Olivia, please," Denise said. His voice was completely unrecognizable, and it was raw, hoarse, and stripped of all its usual arrogance. It was the sound of a man who had spent the entire night watching his empire turn to ash. "You have to undo this," he pleaded. Victoria left with her parents. "They are talking to their legal team this morning. You ruined my life." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "I did not ruin your life, Dennis," I replied, my tone flat and professional. "You built your entire life on a piece of real estate that belonged to me. I simply liquidated my asset." "You do not understand," he begged, his breathing frantic. "They are going to sue me. The other families were there. Everyone knows. If you just retract the email, if you tell them it was a mistake, a joke, I can fix this. We can fix this. I will include you. You can come to dinner. We are family. Olivia." The word family hung in the air, hollow and pathetic. He was trying to use the very concept he had weaponized against me to save himself. He was offering me a seat at a table that had already been repossessed. "You told Victoria's family you were an only child," I reminded him. "You told them your father bought that estate. You used my property to commit financial fraud against multiple women. There is no mistake to retract. Denis, there is only a 30-day eviction notice." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy with desperation. "Olivia, I am sorry," he whispered. "I am so sorry." For a fleeting second, the 15-year-old girl inside me registered the apology. But the 31-year-old wealth manager knew exactly what it was worth. When he was not sorry for erasing me. He was not sorry for stealing my college fund or exploiting my vulnerability. He was only sorry that the audit had finally caught up with him. He was apologizing to the bank, not to his sister. An apology without accountability is just manipulation, I said evenly. The property is legally owned by the November Group. You have 29 days left to clear out your belongings. I suggest you focus on packing instead of negotiating. I did not wait for his response. I moved the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button. The final connection was severed. I felt no guilt, no remorse, and no lingering attachment. I had spent 17 years paying his debts. The account was permanently closed. Chong hai moi hai train hai moi bay much tieo nam tram nam moi jam viet nam tram hai moi hai tu. They did not surrender gracefully. Parasitic systems rarely do. On Monday afternoon, Travis arrived at my firm's corporate headquarters. He did not come alone. He brought a man wearing a bespoke gray suit carrying a thick leather briefcase. It was an aggressive, high-priced corporate litigator. The receptionist called my office to announce them. I did not panic. I simply asked Haley to join me in my private conference room. Travis marched into the room, his face flushed with a desperate, furious energy. He completely ignored me and looked directly at Haley. "My lawyer is here to file a temporary injunction," Travis announced, his voice booming across the polished conference table. "You cannot sell that estate. It is a family asset. We have an oral agreement of equitable interest. The lawyer, a man named Sterling, and placed a stack of legal documents on the table, and he looked supremely confident. "My client asserts that he has contributed significant sweat equity and managed the property under a verbal joint venture agreement," Sterling stated smoothly. "Any sale without his consent constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty. We are prepared to tie this up in litigation for years." I remained seated. I did not raise my voice. I did not show a single trace of intimidation. I simply opened the manila folder sitting in front of me and pulled out the single sheet of paper Dennis had signed 2 years ago in my kitchen. The paper he thought was an insurance waiver. I slid it across the long mahogany table towards Sterling. "I recommend you review your client's documentation before you threaten years of litigation," I said calmly. Sterling picked up the paper. He adjusted his glasses. I watched his eyes scan the text. It was a standard Punakron, bulletproof, short-term residential lease agreement. I watched as Sterling read the specific clause, waiving all claims to equity, adverse possession, or implied ownership. He read the clause confirming Dennis was a month-to-month tenant. He read Dennis's clear, undeniable signature at the bottom of the page. Sterling's confident posture deflated in a matter of seconds. He realized immediately that Travis and Dennis had lied to him. They had sent him into a legal battle without telling him they had already signed away their armor. Sterling placed the paper back on the table. He slowly closed his briefcase and snapped the brass locks shut. "Mr. Sterling," Travis demanded, his voice trembling slightly. "What are you doing? File the injunction." Sterling looked at Travis with a mixture of pity and professional irritation. "There is no injunction to file, Travis. Your son signed an unconditional lease waiver. You have absolutely no legal standing in this matter. Furthermore, based on the documented fraud allegations from the weekend, I strongly advise you to focus your resources on criminal defense counsel. I am withdrawing my representation." Sterling walked out of the conference room without another word. Travis stood frozen, staring at the closed door. The grand illusion of his patriarch status had evaporated, and he turned to look at me, his eyes wide with a sudden terrifying realization. He had spent his life stepping on me to elevate his son. He had absolutely nothing left. Chuang he moi batrain. He moi ba muchtio nam tram nam moi ja Vietnam tram ba moi chintu. The collapse of Dennis's carefully constructed world was absolute and public. By Wednesday, the legal teams representing Victoria's family and the other defrauded women had officially filed massive civil suits against him. The charges included wire fraud, misrepresentation, and grand larceny. The local business journals picked up the story, running headlines about the fake vineyard tycoon who had conned his way into high society. Dennis was forced to surrender his passport. His bank accounts were completely frozen by court order. The bespoke suits, the leased luxury cars, the curated social media presence, it all vanished under the harsh light of federal scrutiny. Travis attempted to secure bail bonds and hire elite defense attorneys for his son, but his own financial reality finally caught up with him. He had drained his retirement accounts and heavily mortgaged his own home to fund Dennis's previous failures. When the country club board caught wind of the scandal, they quietly revoked his membership to protect their reputation. The men he used to play golf with stopped returning his calls. Travis found himself entirely isolated, drowning in secondary debt and watching his golden boy face the very real prospect of a federal prison sentence, and meanwhile, the transition at the Sonoma estate proceeded with mechanical precision. On day 30, a property management team contracted by the November Group arrived at the gates. Dennis had already vacated the premises in the middle of the night, leaving behind the expensive, unpaid furniture he had used to stage his illusion. I authorized a local liquidation firm to auction off the interior contents. The proceeds were immediately diverted into the LLC's accounts. I hired a crew of professional contractors to completely strip the interior of the house. I wanted every trace of Dennis's faux luxury removed. The imported rugs, the pretentious artwork, the crystal champagne flutes from the wedding that never happened. All of it was hauled away in large commercial disposal trucks. I drove up to the estate one final time after the contractors finished their work. I walked through the empty, echoing halls. The house felt lighter. It smelled of fresh paint and clean wood, rather than expensive cologne and lies. I stood in the grand foyer where the string quartet had played. I did not feel a sense of triumphant vengeance, and vengeance implies a lingering emotional connection. I only felt the profound, quiet satisfaction of a successfully balanced ledger. I had removed a toxic liability from my portfolio. I had reclaimed my territory. I walked out the front door, handed the keys to the property manager representing the new LLC structure, and instructed them to list the estate on the open commercial market. The property sold to an international hospitality conglomerate 3 weeks later, yielding a substantial profit margin. The capital was deposited into the secure accounts of the November Group. The financial transaction was flawless, but the true return on investment was the complete eradication of my family's leverage over me. The slate was wiped completely clean. Chuang he moi bon train he moi be muchtio nam tram nam moi jam viet bon tram chin moi tam tu. With the Sonoma estate officially liquidated and the capital securely held within my trust structure, I turned my attention to the future. I did not want the money to sit idle. I did not want it to be a simple monument to my survival. I wanted it to be an active, functioning shield for others. I scheduled another meeting with Haley. We sat in her office, drinking black coffee, surrounded by stacks of incorporation documents. I want to establish a foundation. I told her I want it structured as a permanent endowment. We spent the next 3 months meticulously building the framework. We named it the Eleanor Grant Foundation. It was a direct homage to the woman who had possessed the foresight to protect me when I was entirely vulnerable. The foundation had a very specific, uncompromising mission. We provided comprehensive financial literacy training, legal counsel, and direct capital grants to young women who had aged out of the foster system or who were completely estranged from their biological families. We targeted the exact demographic I had belonged to at 15. Girls who were smart, capable, and driven, but who lacked the basic financial safety net required to survive in a predatory world. The grants were not simple charity. They were structured to cover professional licensing fees, initial deposits for safe housing, and emergency medical expenses. We provided the necessary infrastructure for these women to build their own fortresses. I personally reviewed the final applications. I sat across the table from young women whose eyes held the same quiet, hardened resilience I saw in the mirror every morning. I did not offer them pity. I offered them aggressive financial strategy. I taught them how to read contracts, how to identify manipulative financial behavior, and how to protect their assets from people who claim to love them. I taught them that setting a financial boundary is the highest form of self-respect. The foundation operated quietly. We did not host lavish charity galas or issue self-congratulatory press releases. We simply moved capital to where it was needed most. Every time a grant was dispersed, every time a young woman secured an independent lease or opened a protected business account, I felt a deep, resonant connection to my mother. She had used a trust to shield me from Travis's greed. I was using the profits of my survival to shield hundreds of other women from the same fate. The foundation became the most vital asset in my portfolio. It was not just a philanthropic endeavor, it was the ultimate correction of the past. The money that Travis had tried to steal, the money that Dennis had tried to use for his fraudulent empire, was now actively dismantling the very systems of exploitation they relied on. I had taken the poisoned soil of my family legacy and used it to plant an entirely new forest. Her legacy was finally undeniably secure. Chong hai moi lam tren, hai moi be mukstio num trum, num moi jamviet bon trum chin moi batu. The letters from Travis began arriving in late September, and they were thick, handwritten envelopes sent to my corporate office. He had managed to track down my business address after his phone numbers and emails were permanently blocked. I recognized his slanting, aggressive handwriting immediately. I did not open them. I did not toss them in the trash either. I simply handed them to my executive assistant with explicit instructions to file them in a secure, sealed archive box. In the world of wealth management, you keep all correspondence from hostile entities, but you never engage unless legally required. Nora asked me about it one evening while we were having dinner. We were sitting at our favorite quiet Italian restaurant. Do you ever wonder what he wrote? She asked gently, swirling her glass of red wine. Do you ever wonder if he is actually apologizing? I set my fork down. I looked at the flickering candlelight reflecting on the table. No, I replied honestly. Because an apology from Travis is just another invoice. He is bankrupt, Nora. His reputation is destroyed, and his golden child is facing indictments. He is not reaching out because he suddenly realized the value of his daughter. He is reaching out because I am the only solvent asset left in his network. If I open that letter, I am opening a negotiation, and I no longer negotiate with bad debt. Nora smiled, raising her glass in a silent toast to my boundary. That Thursday, Haley joined us for dinner. When it had become a weekly tradition, every Thursday night, the three of us gathered at that small corner table. We did not discuss Dennis or Travis. We discuss the market, the Foundation's latest grant recipients, and our own independent lives. Looking around that table, I realized something profound. For 17 years, I had believed that family was a biological obligation. I thought it was a table you were forced to sit at, even if they handed you the bill for every meal. I was completely wrong. Family is not defined by blood or shared genetics. Family is a mutual investment of respect, protection, and unconditional support. Haley had protected my mother's legacy for 15 years without asking for a dime. Nora had sat with me in coffee shops, helping me track down credit fraud, demanding nothing but my safety. These women were my board of directors, and they were my shareholders. They were the family I had actively chosen and meticulously built. I did not have to buy a multi-million-dollar estate to earn a seat at this table. I just had to show up and be exactly who I was. The heavy, suffocating anxiety of my 20s was replaced by a deep, unwavering peace. The phone calls that used to trigger panic attacks were permanently silenced. The financial bleeding was entirely stopped. I took a slow sip of my wine and listened to Nora and Haley laugh about a recent court case. The restaurant was warm, and the food was excellent. I was exactly where I belonged. Chong hai moi sao tren hai moi bei mutstio namtram nam moi jansviet, namtram moi chintu. I am standing on the balcony of my own home as I finish telling you this story. It is not a sprawling vineyard in Sonoma. It is a modern, quiet penthouse overlooking the bay. The title deed is registered in my name, and there are absolutely no unauthorized tenants living in the guest room. The air is crisp, and the city below is a brilliant grid of light and motion. People often ask me if I regret the harshness of the eviction. They ask if I ever feel guilty for pulling the rug out from under my brother on his wedding day, or for letting my father face financial ruin alone. Society has a very deeply ingrained script about family loyalty. We are taught that blood requires infinite forgiveness. We are conditioned to believe that setting a firm boundary makes us cruel. But I look at the legal documents, the audit trails, and the foundation grants, and I feel absolutely zero regret. Battered loyalty is not love. It is a hostage situation. When you continually fund the people who actively erase your existence, you are not being noble, and you are simply financing your own destruction. I did not sell that estate out of sudden malice. I sold it because I finally accepted the data. The data clearly showed that my family viewed me as a utility, a silent bank account attached to a disposable sister. They assumed my desire for their approval would forever override my professional logic. They were fundamentally incorrect. If you are sitting in an environment where your generosity is treated as an expectation and your boundaries are treated as an insult, you need to audit your relationship. You do not need their permission to stop writing the checks. You do not need them to acknowledge your pain before you are allowed to secure your own perimeter. A boundary is not a wall to keep people out. It is a door, and you hold the only key. You decide who is worthy of walking through it. And you have every legal and moral right to change the locks when they violate the lease. I do not know what the final court verdict will be for Dena. I do not monitor Travis's bankruptcy proceeding. Their narrative is no longer my concern. My concern is the young women receiving grants from the Eleanor Grant Foundation this week. My concern is the thriving business I built from the ground up. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever had to choose between maintaining a toxic family and maintaining your own sanity, I want to hear from you. Tell me your story in the comments below, and thank you for staying with me until the very end. Hit the like button, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might be struggling to close a bad account in their own life. You are not obligated to save the people who push you under the water. You are entirely enough.